We're at you. I can't believe we're almost done. Wild. You for Unborn. This creepy little alien looking baby here. Birth and sex have this in common, a system of ruthless biological machinery that has absolute control of us. In a moment, we are reduced to the status of slaves, which is part of the joy and part of the horror. Sex or birth, either they function according to plan, which is awesome, or they go wrong, which is the stuff of nightmares. When human flesh reproduces itself, horror is always waiting by the bed. In the past, over a third of women died in hospital in vain attempts to give birth. A woman might well fear as much for herself as for her unborn child, and there were other fears. In a more religious age, devils and demons were the stuff of real belief. Could a woman deliver the spawn of the supernatural? The nightmare of the incubus was never far away, nor were its monstrous children. Today, there are new fears. The reproductive process is haunted by genetic engineering and pharmaceutical disasters. Modern anxieties combine with fears that are much more ancient in Ira Levin's 1967 novel, Rosemary's Baby, subsequently made into a classic movie by Roman Polanski. I thought, well, I want this woman to have a child. The reader knows is not what she's expecting, explains Levin. But I didn't want to get into a realistic situation with birth defects and all, because that is not the stuff of entertainment as I see it. So the choices seem to be either something from outer space or from Satan. I think when a woman chooses to have a child, says Californian horror writer Roberta Lanz, and she really thinks about who she is mating with. Who is this man? Where does he come from? When his sperm meets my egg, what's going to happen? She doesn't really know. There's a moment of very old dark fear, something that is as huge as the universe, as vast and fright and mysterious, and at the same time, it's very simple and frightening. Side. Levin's books are constructed as neatly as an elegant house of cards. Pull one plot twist and everything comes tumbling down. Stephen King. Bigger he was than always, painfully, wonderfully big. He lay forward upon her, his other arm sliding under her back to hold her, his broad chest crushing her breasts. He was wearing, because it was to be a costume party, a suit of coarse leathery armor. Brutally, rhythmically, he drove his new hugeness. She opened her eyes and looked into a yellow furnace eyes, smelled sulfur and tannis root, felt wet breath on her mouth, heard lust grunts and the breathing of onlookers. This is no dream, she thought. This is real. This is happening. From Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. Here's Rosemary's Baby. In Levin's novel, the lovemaking between Rosemary and her husband Guy, sanctioned by God in their marriage, becomes a channel for the devil to plant his satanic seed. She was brought up in a strict Catholic household, says Levin about his character, a large family with many sisters and brothers, and she was brought up to be a good, obedient girl. During that time that the book came out, continues Lanz, people were questioning religious values, and they were asking themselves politically, too, where they stood. And the book shocked a lot of people who wouldn't have connected religion in the same way Ira Levin did. He made us think about how religion ties us, binds us to certain values, even if we question them, even if we are forced to look at them in ways we never have before. It becomes part of us. It is as archaic as our fears and our anxieties. Rosemary's Baby was written and published at the time the God is Dead tempest was whirling around the teapot of the 1960s, says Stephen King, and the book deals with questions of faith in an unpretentious but thoughtful and intriguing way. At the novel's end, Rosemary gives birth to the devil's child, a moment of horror that is also one of revelation. Basically, Rosemary has given birth to the comic book version of Satan, says King, the little imp we were all familiar with as children and who sometimes put in an appearance in the motion picture cartoons, arguing with the little angel over the main character's head. Levin broadens the satire by giving us a Satanist coven compromised almost entirely of old people. They argue constantly in their waspy voices about how the baby should be cared for. Pregnancy is the ultimate creative act, says Levin. Having come through it, I think I gave her a great strength and courage. It's kind of like the maternal instinct takes over, and she is going to defend that child and make the child as healthy as she possibly can. She now looks at this baby and all of her Catholic beliefs come into fashion, Lennis explained. In the beginning, it made her frightened, but she doesn't question anything anymore. What gave her faith to carry this child to term and ultimately to look at this child and want to care for it was that Catholicism, was that link to spirit. So it created a kind of circle that closed itself, but it made a lot of people uncomfortable because you have to ask yourself, what will you do in the name of religion? My wife, raised in the Catholic Church, claims that the book is also a religious comedy, but with its own shaggy dog punchline, says King. Rosemary's Baby, she claims, only proves what the Catholic Church has said about mixed marriages all along. They just don't work. So the asides are, as a writer of fantasy, I cannot conceive in any way in which Rosemary's Baby could be improved. It is, for this reviewer, one of the very finest fantasy films ever made. Harlan Ellison. She reached out to him, her knife turning away. His lips pouted, and he opened his eyes and looked at her. His eyes were golden yellow, all golden yellow, with neither whites nor irises. All golden yellow with vertical black slit pupils. From Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. Rosemary's Baby, USA, 1968. Director Roman Polanski, with Mia Farrow, John Cassavetes, Ruth Gordon, Sidney Blackmer, Maurice Evans, Ralph Bellamy. Paramount Color. Classic contemporary witchcraft chiller based on Ira Levin's best-selling novel, Polanski's direction plays down some of the supernatural elements of the book and replaces them with a subtle menace as Rosemary and Guy Woodhouse, Farrow and Cassavetes, move into a rambling apartment building in central Manhattan. But as their lives increasingly revolve around the flamboyant old couple next door, Minnie and Roman Cassavetes, Gordon and Blackmer in this last film, Rosemary begins to suspect that they want the baby she is carrying. The fine supporting cast includes veteran Bellamy as Manny Singh Doctor, Alicia Cook Jr. as the apartment manager, plus Maurice Evans, Patsy Kelly, Victoria Vetri, here billed as Angela Dorian, Charles Grodin, the voice attorney Curtis, and a nice cameo by producer William Castle. The dream sequence in which Rosemary is raped by the devil was originally cut for the UK release, but was restored in later TV prints. The downbeat ending has the witches winning. How many mothers have died at birth of their children? How many have suckled strange little improbabilities who cause death one way or another? Strange red little creatures with brains that work in bloody darkness we can't even guess at. Elemental little brains aswarm with racial memory, hatred, and raw cruelty with no more thought than self-preservation. And self-preservation in this case consisted of eliminating a mother who realized what a horror she had birthed. I ask you, doctor, what is there in the world more selfish than a baby? Nothing. From The Small Assassin by Ray Bradbury. Then we've got a picture of Ira Levin. And this little like demon baby. The difference between Rosemary's Baby and It's Alive is that Rosemary's Baby is a pure fantasy, says It's Alive director Larry Cohen. I mean, who is really going to give birth to the devil's child? It's one of my favorite movies and I watch it all the time, but It's Alive was trying to deal with something that people really do come up against. Many people do have children with defects, and in their hearts, they may wish this child had never been born. And now they are starting to talk about being able to identify a murder gene that makes someone potentially a killer. So if you could actually predict your child was going to be a potential murderer, then would you want to have that child or not? And then we have an aside. Cohen's movies can still not be mistaken for anyone else's. He is still a developing surprising talent, and it is unlikely that he will restrict himself to the horror genre in the future. But the messianic monsters of his films are too strong to be entirely deserted. And then we've got some stills from Rosemary's Baby. In It's Alive, we see the ultimate wayward child. Where did we go wrong becomes an understatement as the delinquent baby leaves a trail of mayhem and murder wherever he crawls. At the time that we made the picture, continues Colm, it was the drug era and parents were looking at their kids who were suddenly coming home with long hair, smoking grass, taking LSD, and talking strangely, listening to music the parents didn't understand. The parents didn't understand who was in their house, how this person came about. This wasn't the child they raised. In a number of cases, fathers actually killed their children, shot their teenage sons who came home stoned, and the parents were terrified. So when I saw parents actually killing their own children, I said, well, you know, you wake up one morning and you get the impression that you have a monster living in your home, and it was your child and it's changed and something else that you don't know, a stranger that you're afraid of. So these were the things that were happening in America at the time. when I took this idea that I had first cooked up at the age of 10 and added all the other elements together. And that's what we ended up with. And the asides are, I figure if people read about a picture with a monster baby or a big bird in the Chrysler building or an ice cream that's eating people, they say, that sounds like Larry Cohen picture. That's what we want. Larry Cohen. It's Alive. USA 1973, director Larry Cohen with John Ryan, Sharon Farrell, Andrew Dugan, Guy Stockwell, James Dixon, Michael and Sarah, Warner Brothers, Largo Productions, color. After taking a new drug, Lenore Davies, Farrell, gives bloody birth to a murderous mutant baby created with makeup effects designer Rick Baker, which quickly slaughters all the medical staff in the delivery room before making its escape, while her husband, Frank Ryan, tries to hold his family together and stop the police from killing his misunderstood offspring. The city of Los Angeles finds itself battling a new breed of terrifying toddlers. Cohen's witty and subversive screenplay lifts its low-budget thriller above the level of monster movie origins. Music score by the great Bernard Herrmann. And then there's a picture from It's Alive. And that is You for Unborn. Speaking of parents killing their children, there was a film that came out a few years ago that I still feel is pretty under the radar. I'm pretty sure it's on at least one streaming platform. But it was Nicolas Cage and Selma Blair. I was going to say, I forgot her name. It was Nicolas Cage and Selma Blair. It was called Mom and Dad. And it was like some sort of thing made all the parents in the world want to kill their children. That's what the movie was about. And honestly, it was really interesting. I know it kind of messed with my husband because it went to various levels of just like insanity. But I still think that it was a really, I wouldn't say fun, maybe fun. Yeah. It was a really interesting interpretation of that whole idea because it's such a delicate subject that a lot of times people don't want to talk about it, because, it's sacred. But that's why we like horror movies, because you want to talk about things that you're not supposed to, taboo. But yeah, movie recommendation, Mom and Dad. That was You for Unborn. And then we're almost done. Thank you so much for reading with me, and I will see you next week.